amendment that modifies required zoning regulations. I don't have an answer as to why we don't have planned unit development.
So is it something that the Planning Commission could request that we look into this as a tool for planning, because it's actually quite a good tool, and we've obviously seen in the past couple of months a couple of projects that could use this tool, and I expect that even though we seem like a built-out city, we're really not. We could potentially use this for projects that are over a certain size. To mitigate against these sort of specialized zoning districts and specialized this and that. So we would have a planned unit development.
Yeah, absolutely. The Planning Commission could direct staff to look into researching the feasibility of planned unit developments.
Can we put that on the agenda for a vote for the next meeting?
For November 13th?
Or whenever it's possible, according to public.
I think we have two pretty packed agendas up until the end of the year, and so I think the most reasonable time frame would be the first meeting in January to discuss that.
That would be fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. That will be the end of the open forum. The next thing we're going to consider is the consent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. That will be the end of the open forum. The next thing we're going to consider is the consent agenda. We have 5 items on the consent agenda today. The first is an extension request for Luso 2 Apartments Plan Development and Design Review at approximately 57 North, 1000 West. Item number 2 on our consent agenda is extension request for Hardware Village 2 Design Review at approximately 152 North, 500 West. Those 2 items don't have a public hearing associated with them. Item number 3 is conditional use for Cabinet Assembly at approximately 75 South, 600 West. And item number 4 is plan development modifications for Alliance House at approximately 1805 South Main Street. Items 3 and 4 do have a public hearing, and I've received some comment cards for at least one of those items. So if you wish to speak about the item number 3 or 4 on the consent agenda, which is the conditional use for cabinet. Damon Talbot, if you want to approach the podium, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Damon Talbot. I am a resident in the Ballpark neighborhood of District 5. Tonight, I am here representing the Alliance House, its board of directors, and its members. We were before you several months ago to get the initial approval for the plan development, and we appreciated working with the city since then to make some modifications, which will make. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Damon Talbot. I am a resident in the Ballpark neighborhood of District 5. Tonight, I am here representing the Alliance House, its board of directors, and its members. We were before you several months ago to get the initial approval for the plan development, and we appreciated working with the city since then to make some modifications, which will make the property a little bit more feasible, more safe, and appropriate for the neighborhood. We're very pleased that our neighbors are very happy with what we're coming up with. And the general items that are changed in this modification are fairly minor. We're removing a couple windows that are on one side that would be overlooking some of the neighbor properties, and also where we're going to put our electrical. And then we're changing the front facade a little bit just so we do not have to pay a yearly fee to the city for an encroachment lease. So that was just something we wanted to do as a nonprofit to reduce the burden on our payment to the city. But we would just really want to take this opportunity to just thank the city for all the work they've done over the last couple of years as we've put together this project. Tomorrow we will demolish the old building, and with your approval tonight, we're looking forward to starting construction in the next coming weeks, and we'll invite you around this time next year for a ribbon cutting ceremony. So we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Are there any more comments about those two items or any new comments by email? No. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing on the consent agenda. The other item on our consent agenda tonight are the approval of meeting minutes from September 11 and September 25th. So now it's time for a motion or discussion by the Planning Commission.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Mike Christensen. I'm going to have to say, I was going to say M. Christensen, but that doesn't help. And a second by Commissioner Scheer. Commissioner Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner. And I will vote yes on all items. So the consent agenda is approved with one abstention of everything, one abstention on the minutes from 9:25, a no on item number 2, and a yes vote in every other case. Thank you. The room kind of clears out now because people who were here for the consent agenda items may be done, so give them a minute. The next item on our regular agenda is a zoning map and text amendment for Jordan River Fair Park District. The planner is Amanda Roman. If you want to speak on this item and you haven't submitted a card yet, please do that at this time, or you can send an email into the commission address, email address. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I am here to present the application for the proposed Jordan River Fair Park zoning district. We held a briefing with the commission at the last meeting on October 9th, and this is a follow-up meeting to make a recommendation on the proposed zoning to the council. I'll go into some project background prior to going into the zoning itself. Snell and Wilmer is representing Larry H. Miller Company, who is the applicant and property owner. They're proposing to create a new zoning district in the Fair Park neighborhood to facilitate its redevelopment. The property is between the Jordan River and Redwood Road and North Temple and I-15. It consists of 32 parcels and is just under 100 acres in size. As we discussed in the last meeting, the city and applicant need to come to an agreement on the proposed zoning and development agreement by December 31st of this year, or the district will be exempt from all zoning regulations. The Jordan River Fair Park District is part of a newly established Utah Fair Park Area Investment and Restoration District. And this was created by House Bill 562. The U-Fair District aims to develop a walkable mixed-use neighborhood which is centered around the Jordan River and Utah State Fair Park. The vision includes revitalizing the Jordan River, rezoning for redevelopment, and potentially attracting a Major League Baseball expansion franchise. Plans also include retail, entertainment, housing, and employment opportunities. The bill requires, as I mentioned, that we enter into an agreement with the applicant by the end of the year, or the property will be exempt from all zoning regulations. I have an existing conditions slide on here, and just before diving into the details of the proposal, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge the community's concerns. We've received some emails from community members regarding concerns over gentrification and the potential impacts of this redevelopment. And so I understand that residents are, a lot of residents spoke to the potential that homes are being demolished as part of this redevelopment. And I just wanted to show this existing condition slide, which demonstrates that there's actually no residential dwelling units within the area proposed for rezoning. The project site consists of a vacant motel and restaurant, office buildings for Pacific Corp and Power, and a will result in a net gain of housing options. And then additionally, as part of all rezone requests and required by code as of this year, applicants must come to an agreement with the city council regarding a community benefit that will result from rezone requests. And while a specific community benefit has not been formally accepted, since we're not yet to the city council, as noted in the staff report under condition 5, staff is recommending that a portion of the new housing be offered at affordable rates. We believe this is an important step in addressing our overall housing needs in Salt Lake and also ensuring that the benefits of this redevelopment stay within the community. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody's feedback, and all comments will be shared with the council. So overall, the city is very supportive of redeveloping the site into a mixed-use development aimed at attracting a Major League Baseball team. So while the city is fully aligned with the overall vision, which meets the goals outlined in the North Temple Boulevard plan, we do continue to seek assurances that the vision is clearly represented within a regulatory framework, which is before you today. The staff feedback from the presentation and the staff report are suggestions to modify the Jordan River Fair Park District zoning ordinance to make sure that the regulations are clear and can be referenced as the site redevelops. Since we were before you on October 9th, the applicant resubmitted a revised ordinance the day that the staff report was published, so last week, and they took into consideration some of the comments. So in general, the changes include they have added a commitment to provide a minimum of 10% of gross development area as open space within the project boundaries, and they can speak more to what that entails. The sign code has been revised, and it will be similar to the D1 and D4 zoning districts, and the regulations are reflective of what was approved with the SEG proposal. And more details can be discussed with the applicant as well. And then they also removed or added regulations to some of the uses that staff had a negative recommendation for because in general they didn't meet the overall purpose of the zoning district. So the purpose of the district is to revitalize the Jordan River corridor, implement the Utah Fair Park Area Investment and Restoration District, as approved by the state, and provide for a mix of uses, including recreation, cultural, convention, entertainment, office, sports, residential, and commercial. And then also generate economic development and increase employment opportunities. Applicability of this zoning ordinance. So the applicant is proposing that land within this zone is not subject to adopted land use plans. The language has been slightly modified, and they have spoken to us as well as public utilities that public utilities and transportation plans will remain applicable. The exemption would be to the general plans for the area, such as the North Temple Boulevard plan. State-owned land is already not subject to any city-imposed regulations. Much of the overall U-Fair district, which encompasses more than the Jordan River Fair Park zone, is state-owned land. So they can already develop under their own regulations, not ours. And then the applicant is also proposing to be exempt from the airport flight path overlay, and they have agreed to work on a development agreement with public utilities regarding the applicability of the riparian corridor overlay, as full exemption from the overlay is not supported. The proposed zoning, so the area within the zoning district would have no building setbacks, which is generally supported by staff. The existing zoning is the transit station area, which will, perhaps after this meeting and the next item, the mixed use consolidation is proposed to be changed to mixed use zoning districts, and those zoning districts typically have smaller setbacks. The updated proposal has new regulations that state that setbacks will apply to the Jordan River, and that will be specified in a development agreement. The applicant has also agreed to provide an open space plan that will require at least 10% of gross development area to be used for passive or active open space, including use as a pedestrian circulation area. In general, staff is appreciative of them adding a number to the proposed open space, and looks forward to continuing those conversations with the City Council and the applicant. The proposed zoning district has a proposed building height of 400 feet with design review required for buildings over 200 feet. The regulations state that buildings over 200 feet must include a 5-foot building step back. That requirement is found in a lot of other zones, specifically downtown zones. And the building must include one of the following: a mid-block walkway. The applicant did not provide a minimum width, affordable housing incentives, or provide publicly owned but privately accessible open space within the boundaries of the district. And no minimum square footage was provided with that either. They also slightly modified the language regarding plans to the FAA, but in general, any development within this area will need to take into consideration and meet FAA regulations. So ultimately, building height will end up being dictated by the FAA. So staff feedback on the proposed building height. We are recommending that if a mid-block walkway is developed to offset additional building height, it should have a minimum width of 15 feet. This matches other zoning districts. In the downtown districts, mid-block walkways associated with additional building height have to be at least 20 feet in width. We are also recommending that open space associated with the additional building height should have a minimum square footage listed in code. And then, as I specified, the FAA will ultimately regulate the allowable building height. Right now, the city, the applicant, and the FAA, with the help of a consultant, are working on an airport or a airspace study, and there's no outcome to the study yet. It should be finished by Thanksgiving. It will be given to the City Council for their consideration, and it's just determining the overall impacts of development in this area, and will end up giving recommendations for building height and development. Proposed land uses. So some of the originally proposed uses did not align with the overall vision of the district, as stated by the applicant and stated within the purpose statement of the district. So the applicant has revised their proposed land use table and added regulations to some uses, such as gas stations and drive-throughs. They need to be associated with an overall development. So like a standalone drive-through facility for a restaurant wouldn't be permitted, but it may be permitted if it was attached to a building that had other retail uses. And then they also deleted other proposed uses that did not meet the vision of the district, such as transportation, terminals, and outdoor storage. The proposed design standards. So the applicant is proposing that design standards, which are regulated in Chapter 21A37, would only be applicable to private development along, let me reword it. So design standards would only apply to development along Redwood Road and North Temple. Those are both public streets. And so they are proposing different standards for public streets than they are private streets. And then buildings within the interior of the district would not be subject to design standards. The applicant is proposing to screen mechanical equipment and provide street trees, which are already regulated in code. Staff feedback regarding the design standards. As we discussed at the last meeting, staff is recommending that design standards apply to development along all public streets and the Jordan River, not just Redwood Road or North Temple. And we recommend adding standards for lighting, entry features, parking garages, and maximum length of building facades. And at the last meeting, it was discussed that maybe the standards don't apply to every public street, but they apply to the major arterials. So that could be an option as well. And so we do encourage the applicant to continue working with the council on those standards. Signage for the district. So the signage code from the original proposal has just been deleted. That was based on our old code that is being revised currently with the zoning consolidation. So the new signage proposal is consistent with our D1 and D4 regulations. They're also proposing to allow additional signage within 1,000 feet of an event area, such as a stadium, and then include directional and monument signage to communicate the district's identity. This is done at the Fair Park, so it'd be just a similar branding signage. And then they're proposing to have a public assembly facility sign as regulated by code, and proposing that signage not visible or directed to the towards the public right-of-way would not be regulated. The applicant can speak more to the signage proposal as well. So city recommendations. Planning, the city is recommending approval with the conditions listed in the staff report, which are on the screen. I'll go over them quickly. The applicant shall continue to work with public utilities on the applicability of the riparian corridor overlay. Unless otherwise approved by public utilities, the overlay shall remain applicable. Public utilities and transportation plans shall remain applicable to the Jordan River District. The applicant shall follow mitigation measures as dictated in the airspace impact study. A minimum percentage of the entire project must be dedicated as open space and accessible to the public. A percentage of workforce housing shall be provided within the project boundaries. Design standards shall apply to all buildings facing public streets and the Jordan River frontage. The standards shall be updated to include lighting, entry features, parking garage specifications, and limits on street-facing building facade length. Mid-block walkways associated with additional building height shall have a minimum width of 15 feet. And then the final condition was that concerns raised at the last Planning Commission meeting need to be addressed prior to the council adopting the term sheet and the associated development agreement. Next steps after this meeting, we'll work on our transmittal. We'll get that transmitted to the council by next week. November 12th is the city council briefing. November 19th, there will be another public hearing and potentially a second public hearing. And then the council will make will vote on the proposal on the 3rd or 10th of December. And just to reiterate, an agreement does need to be reached by the end of the year, or else the district will not be subject to any of our regulations, including the overlays, building height, setbacks. etc. Applicant is here, and I can also answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rowan. Let's have the applicant join the table and give a presentation if you need to, or you have 10 minutes if you need it. 10 minutes? Yeah. Yeah, well, we're timing.
A number of LH voted me at the public comments, so thank you. And some of you are here at the work session. So what I'll do is I am just going to very quick over a few slides, and then I'm going to jump into the ones that focus on changes that we've made since the work session.
I'm sorry.
Real
sir.
quick.
Just for, yeah.
Will you state your name? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Wade Budge here representing Larry H. Miller. Thank you very much. And thanks for your comments. At the outset, before I run into the slides, we want to receive comments from all of you today. And as you can see, we've been all put in a box relative to the timing and the negotiation period. And as we go through the phase of getting your recommendation and your comments, we're now going to transition into final negotiation relative to the code language and then also the development agreement. You have some of the terms of the development agreement, which have been commented upon by some of you, but we would appreciate any comments you have because I think they could help guide future discussions. So whether we get positive or negative, we want to receive those comments because that's important as part of this, what we're viewing as a iterative process through a very truncated time period, very short time period. And so we look forward to those comments. Please ask that you can provide those to us. Okay. The staff has done an excellent job of orienting you to the project. I think the one thing I want to focus on briefly before we jump into the new slides is this slide. The purple denotes the area that is the subject of the district jurisdiction that we are trying to accommodate. When I say accommodate, we are negotiating with the district who has the tax and finance resources to develop this area. And so we have to have one mind towards the programming and values that are represented by zoning in the city, and then another to the issues that are presented and opportunities presented by these state-owned lands that are in purple in addition to the private lands. Let me jump then to the new slides. So I thought it'd make sense based on some public comment to reflect existing conditions. Slide A is a state office building. Slide B is an old wildlife resources area. Slide C is another state building. Site D, a state building, and then the natural resources building in E. I think that's important, as staff indicated in their report. We're not replacing any housing whatsoever. Not a single home is within the district boundaries. So let's just jump into our changes. So our changes since the last meeting is we heard loud and clear that we want to make sure that some of these principles or the overlays themselves are applied to this private land, set of private lands. And so we've added provisions into the ordinance talking about submitting plans to the FAA, avoiding interference with the aircraft flight paths. And then as we noted here at the end, the topic remains fluid because we're still in the process of engaging this consultant jointly to obtain their advice relative to this detail. We also clarified some of the uses. We know that you're in the process of doing a consolidated zoning ordinance, and so we wanted to marry those uses that are going in that consolidated table to what we're doing so there wouldn't be a disharmony. In doing that, we saw that obviously some uses would not make sense in this district. I've highlighted but a few here. And we did hear relative the staff and comments of the commission relative to service stations. We don't anticipate that's going to be a make or break element of the project. However, we do think that a service station might make sense on Redwood Road. And so we put a buffer so that we would never have a temptation of a service station that would be close to that resource, which is really driving this project, which is the Jordan River. So that's an element. And there's still some refinements, and I'm sure we'll get comments from you all about those refinements. On the signs, as staff accurately indicated, the idea was rather than try and create a separate sign program that would be too hard to administer, different from ones that are already existing, we decided to adopt the D1 and D4 because those are known by staff and by this commission. We did ask for some allowances in addition to the D1, D4 programming, and that includes the stadium air sign regulations that are found around the Delta Center to be available for that stadium area of the district. And then, as was indicated, some directional wayfinding, but those are small, relatively low impact signage. It's more of in terms of just orienting you into that you're in a common area. and then the need for a sign master plan. And then for a public assembly facility sign, if you go on I-15, there is a public assembly facility sign at Real. So this is intended to operate such as that. It could potentially, we don't have a current location for it, but just to give you the concept, it would be something on I-80 or potentially Redwood that would denote or communicate to passersby that there's a game or there's some event. There are regulations because of federal and state laws about not being allowed to do off-premise advertising, so it would not be a billboard. It would be able to communicate that there's a team, a game, a facility, and some sponsors, but those sponsors are limited. So that's an element that we've added, and we welcome comments or questions on that detail. I appreciate the staff being thoughtful in preparing conditions. I think that's exactly what we need coming out of this process. We've had discussions with public utilities since our meeting, including as recently as today. For that reason, we've agreed that the ordinance should say that the riparian overlay applies. We, however, want to communicate to all of you in the public that we're going to need to negotiate some variations, and I'm going to show you why here in just a moment. We've also talked in terms of mitigation measures relative to the airport. I've already touched on that. There was an item of concern about trying to have design standards applied to the Jordan River. Our concern is that our Jordan River orientation is going to be pretty narrow because we only front in a narrow area. We don't intend to have office buildings per se there. We intend to have a stadium there. And so we were worried that we're trying to have design standards applied to a use that will be very distinct because it's a stadium. So we thought that that didn't make as much sense. Relative to the blockways, we're in favor of those. We know that they're important. Let me show you why. And this is one of the versions of Sasaki's plan for our project. You'll note that our blocks are not downtown blocks. These are not 10-acre blocks. But we also know from talking to our engineers and traffic consultants that this road network is going to need to be revised to accommodate the traffic we're anticipating. So we want some fluidity, ability to monitor or change how it is we're going to orient our roads. And so our blocks are indeterminate at this point. But we do agree that mid-block walkways are important. We just haven't settled that 15 feet is what it is. They have to operate. We just don't know what the minimum is. Let me zoom in a little bit more. One of the things that I like about this is we talked a lot about open space last time. In talking to our advisors, we're going to clearly meet 10%. We are anticipating to probably be more in the neighborhood of 18 to 20% because we're intending to have a pedestrian walkway, as you can see, kind of up towards, paralleling to, North Temple, working its way down to that larger green towards the corner of Redwood, behind what's currently the Ramada, and then, of course, circulating down and bringing you back over towards the stadium, which is the item of focus. As for the last few moments I have, let me just show you a couple of other items that I think are important. We are currently doing a study for a tenant we have now, which is the Rocky Mountain Power study. And we've hired the same architect that did the 111 tower in downtown. And some of the concepts we're working on is a multi-story tower, possibly as high as 160, 180 feet. And this would go through a process of making sure that it's incorporated into our open space network. And it would also be in the smack dab in the middle of our project. But that is just one item that we're dealing with right now. This is another version of the concept that we're dealing with relative to how it is we would incorporate it. The reason why it's an early lead item is we need to get Rocky Mountain Power out of their current location and into this building so that we then have room to do the other facilities that we're anticipating for this site. And then this is completely conceptual art, but this brings to the fore some of the things that we're dealing with, and this is one of the things we intend to be talking to public utilities about. Our intent is not to make this kind of hardened bank be what exists up and down the whole river, but we think that in order to achieve the activation we're hoping for in this small segment, we might need to negotiate some access items and the ability to put some structures close to the river, but only for the purpose of making it so that when you arrive to this part of the river, you still feel like you're on the trail network, that you still feel connected all the way up and down the valley, but that you're there at a there, so to speak. And you're able to participate in the fair, which you're gonna see in the background. Who knows if we end up getting a Ferris wheel or not, but that would be the intent. And as I indicated at the last meeting, the hope would be that we could negotiate some sort of arrangement with the city, because the city owns so many resources in this area, that we could really create that kind of experience where you could maybe put in at Fisher's, come float through this area, and then pull out at the state lands, which are just up the street. Here's another conceptual drawing. And when I say up the street, it's just off the page at the bottom. Could be maybe a potential, up the page towards the top, as you see all that greenfield area past the current rodeo grounds as a potential area for a pull out. So those are the types of concepts that we're trying to incorporate into this area. But as you think of baseball stadiums across the country, many of them are focused next to some feature of significance in the city. Obviously, Pac-Bell or the Giants Stadium comes to mind, relative to its location vis-a-vis the bay. And so those are some of the elements that we're dealing with relative to this project, and we want to take your input. So with that, I'll wrap it up. But I did want to mention on the MOU, that's an item we understand. A comment was made by Commissioner Gale about looking for a way to make sure that the city, relative to its current boat loadout, would have some assurance that would have an equivalent or some other type of facility in replacement. And that's something that we're looking at, how to make sure we're able to deliver on that. But we have a lot of drafting tasks in the next few weeks, so we would look forward to receiving your comment. Thank you for your time tonight.
I do. I'm wondering if you can go back to the page where you had listed out the staff's recommendations and your response to them, because we didn't get through it, and go over those.
Yep. So let's go through it more closely. Number 1 relates to the riparian corridor.
Yeah, I think you got through number 4, and then you.
So let me pick up at 5. On workforce housing, this is an important principle. It's actually in the statute. What the statute states is that 20% of the increment generated from the redevelopment of those state lands must go into a fund for workforce and moderate income housing. We think that it makes a lot of sense, and we believe incorporating a lot of the workforce housing product in the district makes a lot of sense.
Can I ask a
We haven't settled
clarifying
on a
question
percent.
on that before you move on? Is that fund specifically just for the district, or is that fund to be used in the city or statewide?
It's where it's to be administered by the district. The district is not limited to using it only in the district. We think that that's a low-lying opportunity, meaning it's a piece of go pick, because those state parcels are in need of redevelopment, and so there's an opportunity to incorporate them into this larger district and have some workforce housing in those areas.
So how is the district then going to administer those funds? Are you going to have a committee, an executive director that decides those things? How is that going to play with maybe a public interface of like how
Excellent question.
we direct the need for that?
So the district has 5 board members, one of whom is Councilmember Petro. The board just hired a executive director named Ben Bies, and he is administering the district. We are not the district, but what we would envision recommending to the district and ask that they would accept is entering into some sort of interlocal agreement with the city's housing group, who has some great experience in administering increment for the use of housing. But none of that has been done as of yet, to be candid. But we think there is definitely an opportunity to take that resource of 20% of increment. Oftentimes it's only in a CRA 10%. 20% of increment, and make it so that we're able to incorporate and integrate workforce housing into the broader project. Obviously, this project's going to have a lot of housing product, and we want to make sure it's attainable and accessible by people of multiple income levels.
Is there some way that we can kind of recommend that the disbursement of those funds stay within a specific area located A, within this district, or B, within that general geographic zone, so that
Makes sense to
the
make that right. Yes,
the taxes captured from that stay there?
that would make sense. We'd be very disappointed if they left the area.
Yeah, I think that I've learned through the years I've been involved in stuff, is that you have to spell it out
Yeah,
in order for those funds to not disappear and go further out. That becomes something that gets transmitted to the city council, that that percentage of houses to satisfy the 5th recommendation by staff, that additionally, any funds that are captured from that taxing entity of those 20%, that we have some sort of idea of who's gonna be in charge of dispersing those funds, and that those funds then stay in two areas: one, the district, and two, then maybe a larger generalized area, but still within that community.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I also have a question about U Fair, and
Yes.
I wasn't at the last meeting, but I did watch the entire show on TV, so that was interesting. Yes. And so you said that the tax increment would be on the state lands,
Yes, so that's from
not on this project.
not the tax increment from this project has been pledged for other purposes, including potentially the financing of the stadium. When I say this land, it's broken into three categories, if I may, just to kind of make it so my comments make a little more
Yes.
sense. I'm going to go back to this slide. So the purple lands are broken into three categories, and I should have drawn them. But anyway, imagine the area where that is the private lands, which is that area in red. Okay. And then imagine the areas that we all think of in terms of the fairgrounds, which is the area on both sides of North Temple, but east of the river. And so that's the second category, fairgrounds, which is state land. And then the third category is other state lands. To answer your question, it's increment generated from other state lands. And you may say, well, those are exempt from taxation, so how would it be generated? The reason is the statute provides for privilege tax to be paid. So as development occurs on there, that development will be taxed just as any other development. And that increment, which is going to be a big increment number because you're starting from a zero basis, is going to be 20% of that large number will be devoted to workforce housing.
So none of that taxation then will be coming to the taxing entities.
That's right. That's not
like
quite.
the county or the schools or the city.
The city will get under the statute a cost agreement with the district. We're not involved in that, but it's in the statute. So there are some funds, but yes, you're correct. That increment, at least for the initial period, will not be going to the taxing entities, as you mentioned, but will be going for those purposes of redeveloping this area, one of which is workforce housing.
And your property, but the taxes on that are also subject to a tax increment?
Yes, but it's not to the same percentages.
Okay,
So-
but so the city will not be receiving, or none of the taxing entities will be receiving tax from your property either.
No, that's not right. I mean, they will receive the current amount because they're entitled to retain that throughout.
Okay.
And then there's a sharing relative to the increments, and I can pull up the statute if we need.
So
But it's not to the same degree, sorry.
So economically, in terms of city and county and school district benefit, that is to a brand new development and all of its very high increase in value, we're not going to see the full percentage of that. We're just going to see a small percentage of that.
You're going to see certainly a smaller percentage relative to the property tax. There's going to be
Right.
a lot relative to TRT, which transient room tax, because there will be hotels as part of this. There will be a lot relative to sales tax, and which is the city is a very large participant in sales tax, and then of course the income tax from those that are in that area, which I know helps schools but not the city.
Okay.
But we're giving some mind to those items and hopefully trying to influence it in a positive way.
Okay. I have another question. If the Larry H. Miller Company no longer or cannot develop this land or cannot develop a major league stadium for reasons, any kind of reason, the new zoning district would carry with the land. Is that correct?
The new zoning would apply to the land, correct?
So it would apply to anyone who the Larry H. Miller Company would sell it to. Is that correct?
It would apply to whoever is the owner of the land, correct?
Right. Is there anything keeping anybody from building, say, a Walmart there? I mean, would that be an allowed use under the zoning district?
There certainly is retail is an allowed use.
Right.
There's certainly, as you go through our land planning process, we're not creating a block that's intended for that kind of retail use.
But if you actually don't get around to laying out blocks in any real way.
Yeah, I mean, we have no. I just want to be crystal clear.
Yeah,
We have no
it's just
intentions.
an
You're playing
imaginary.
a scenario
I'm
not
just
involving
trying an
us.
imaginary scenario on, which is
Yep.
that 2 years down the road, no major league stadium, no major league team. Very sad. Okay, we're all not happy about that. But
Thank you.
There's a big piece of land still sitting there. It gets turned over to somebody from Las Vegas, L.A.
Yeah.
Someone who's not even Utah, and they decide to build a Walmart or a gated community with 10 gigantic homes or a car dealership or
No, car
Mar-a-Lago or
Car dealerships
a shopping center with a Target and a CVS. And I mean, some people will be very happy about that. But so there's really no controls that pass on through the from this development.
No, that's not correct. Because the use table doesn't allow some of the uses that you've mentioned.
Okay.
But in all fairness, a number of them would be.
Yes.
The one thing that I think I would want to interject is, this is very expensive land.
Yes.
Because of Salt Lake's success and land being expensive in Salt Lake. Does it lend itself because of that reason for large surface lots? The types of things that are associated with those types of uses that you mentioned. Because when you're paying what you're paying, you have to make sure you're obtaining a good dense project.
So we're relying on the value of the land to carry on some measure of density.
And the land use controls that are going to be in the zone district, in the zone, as well
land
as in
use
the
controls,
development agreement.
which are admittedly minimal.
Which are different than you might see in other areas of the city, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
In the
Madam Chair.
entire purple area,
Yes.
are there any residences in any part of it?
We have checked and there are none.
Okay.
There are none. And so it's all, and
There's adjacent. There's housing
it
adjacent to
is
these?
adjacent. For instance, the KOA is nearly surrounded by this district. And the KOA serves for many people as a housing resource in addition to its other purposes. But this district does not, while it comes around it, it does not include it. So there's no displacement of homes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam
Any
Chair.
other clarifying questions from, go ahead.
Yes. So no, I'm blanking what it was. Crap. Sorry.
Can we go back to, we haven't gone through all of
Thank you.
those.
Yes, Commissioner
Yeah,
Berry, thank
so
you.
I know we get off track, but I
Yes.
want to hear what
So-
you say on all of them.
I think on number 6, design standards would continue to apply to the main public roads. They would also be the robust process, which would involve this body if it goes over 200 feet in height. We're cautiously hopeful we'll be able to have that kind of demand, that we'll need a building that tall. And we're cautiously optimistic that as we get more east in the project, that we'll be okay from a height perspective relative to the FAA regulations. And we cite as a data point the fact that those 2 existing towers, or are they 3? At any rate, they're 250 feet in height. So that kind of gives us a reference point. But just so you're aware, and I know this came up in our meeting, we don't have the same kind of design standards that would apply to the buildings facing the Jordan River. So feel free to offer comments on that, and we'll continue to evaluate that.
Before I offer comments, Amanda, what does staff think about the de facto, like not having design standards on interior streets, but kind of relying on design standards that would be kicked in for buildings over 200 feet? Is that adequate? Or
Can you say the last part again?
so this, like, instead of having design standards along the street, what I'm hearing is that what then would be acceptable is any building that is over 200 feet would then de facto have design standard review. Is that adequate to staff?
Staff is concerned about the lack of design standards on either public streets or main arterials, which we've expressed. The 200-foot trigger is typically associated with more standards in 21A37 than just building height. So you'd have,
Gotcha.
I think one of the main concerns is building length. The district can have unlimited building length
agree with
as
that.
proposed, which is a concern. And then, we recommended entry feature lighting, just to up the design standards, specifically on, your suggestion last time was reasonable. Like even if the whole district was included public streets, which it won't, many of them will be private, to really point out the main arterials, so that those street facing facades can, that public private interface.
So I would just recommend then, I guess, that because we don't know where your roads are going to land,
Right.
because you've indicated you don't know.
Right.
You just know you have to redo them based on the anticipated traffic. That somehow that's a conversation or points that we communicate to the city council that still need to be in the development agreement, kind of still open-ended, like where those streets land may require some design standards. I think those are what staff just brought up are some of the key points of any design review that we do. So they're not unreasonable in themselves.
Right.
And you may design them really great that we'd be like, that looks wonderful. But just saying it only applies to those two main public roads, I think there's still room for negotiation and compromise of what that looks like, because you don't know what your road system is going to be.
Well, particularly if we were to ask you to take ownership of South Temple, because it's currently private, then that might fall into that classification of, needing the kind of treatment that North Temple and Redwood deserve. I mean, I just cite that as an example, because that is a unique thing about this site, and I hadn't understood before I got involved in the project, but South Temple's private in that area.
Yeah.
And so it's kinda
I'm
interesting.
just suggesting that maybe as part of the discussions with the city council that we still kind of work that one.
Okay.
That it has a little bit of opportunity to benefit the project as well. So.
We're still in question mode.
I have a question.
So, okay.
I'm sorry.
Should we finish item 7 and 8 real quick, and
Sure,
then we can?
of course.
Let's do that.
So on the grid, our anticipation is to follow a grid somewhat similar to what I showed you from the Sasaki plan. What I tried to communicate is that there are traffic items that were still being negotiated, and that involves a larger discussion with UDOT relative to interface with state highways. But we absolutely intend to have mid-block walkways, and that's in there. The only thing we're lacking is that dimension. It'll certainly be wider than like a Paseo in Barcelona or something, but it may not be at 15 feet. I just don't know yet. But to the extent that consistency with the 15-foot standard is important, we'd just ask for that comment to be communicated. And then the last item made sense to us, so we just made that comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Commissioner Sherry?
I have several questions, and this is not commentary. We are keeping the smokestacks, is that correct?
We hope so. They're not currently ours. So we have put under contract all of the land that's in the zone.
Yes.
And then we have an option on the smokestacks, but we don't yet own them.
Okay.
So let me see so if you think about it, the smokestacks are actually just right outside.
Right.
But you'll note
Okay.
that when we do the art, we have them in there.
We do. I did note that.
The shadow is in your. On your
The shadow is
parcel.
on our property.
Right. I saw the shadows. Yeah. And similarly, there are high tension wires in this district. Is there any plan for doing anything with those?
Yes. So the ones that go north-south,
Yes.
more or less right through near the current headquarters, have to stay because they're double transmission.
Right.
The other two are removed to the perimeter so that they can make way for a ball stadium.
Okay.
And then there's another one down at the bottom, kind of near the ABF trucking, that will be moved out of the way from the perimeter.
Are you aware if any of the land is a brownfield, and have you done environmental phase 1 environmental?
We are beyond that, and we're in 5 voluntary cleanup programs.
Okay.
Being administered by the State Department of Environmental Quality. And we also have discovered through our environmental diligence that section of the Jordan River is polluted pretty significantly, not because of activities on Rocky Mountain Power's land, Rocky Mountain Power's line has some impacts, and we're addressing those, but likely from downstream or upstream users. As was indicated by in the UFair meeting that was held last week, we have applied together with the state who owns the river for some grants for cleanup. We anticipate that cleanup will cost around $10 million. Our initial grant is about $4 million. So we're taking very seriously the opportunity, but also the challenge to clean up this area. So yes, it is a brownfield.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, I remembered. It did mention in there about the public-private streets. Is the idea that other streets that you're creating would be private as well, or?
They
you're
very
just
well
talking-
could be public.
Okay.
I will note this one detail. We are contractually obligated to seek to have one of them named Electric Avenue. So to the extent that means anything to any Eddie Money fans around here. But anyway, the answer is yes. There will be a street network. Currently, all we have is the two public streets that adjoin that have been identified for design standards, and then the anticipated plan is to have the streets as indicated here, which are these north to south streets that would then start to create a grid.
Okay. And then for staff, does the streets being private create issues in terms of setting like standards for buildings that are fronted on them, or is that's fine? It's the same as for a public street?
The way that the proposal is written, the only standards that would apply to private streets would be to screen mechanical equipment and provide street trees. They do not have any design standards associated with buildings.
There aren't any in there, but it's not. If worked out, those could be like if.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
They could be added.
Okay. And then one thing that wasn't quite clear to me from the bill, if agreement isn't reached on the 31st, is it that there is no zoning, or is it that the land use control reverts to the district board?
It's the district.
Okay, so
District's board.
if there is no agreement, it's not that it's anything, it's that group of 5 then becomes the governing body which sets land use.
Correct.
Okay.
Which goes to my other question, which is both to staff and to the applicant, which is who makes a final determination about the site plan? How is that developed, and how is that, or I know that site plans are always a little bit tentative, especially something of this size, but who is part of what is the decision process for that? Since we're not approving a site plan.
Yeah, I'll Amanda, just feel free to jump in and correct me. We would make application with the city. We would intend to go through a DRC or technical review process, get all the agencies involved.
Yes, technical. Right.
And then have it approved at a staff level. The exception of that would be, of course, if we're seeking to have a project that's over 200 feet, that would come back. Another exception would be plats, to the extent that the plat falls in a category under your current ordinances or however you might modify them. That is a role that planning commissions often undertake as well. I haven't looked on the plat detail, but on site plan, your question was on site plans, so.
Well, subdivision plan, site plan, all sort of comes together at the same time, right? I mean, it's kind of,
They can.
maybe not necessarily completely, but I mean, this suggests a certain kind of plan. You know?
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering how the final plan is generated and approved. And if it's approved by the UFair district, or is it approved by the planning director?
I'd imagine both. I'd imagine both, because what we're imagining, and from our preliminary discussions, is that the UFair is, because they control so much in the terms of the purse strings,
Yes.
that we're going to have to go and get their approval, and then obviously be able to administer that through the process that would be done by planning
Right,
department.
and through transportation as well. Does that go through transportation? Okay.
Our
thank you.
understanding is yes.
Okay, thanks.
On that, I think if you're talking about the site plan, like the overall, in the bill, it talks about it calls it a draft plan, and it says that the district advisory board approves it, and that they just have to do one public hearing, and then they can vote on it and approve it. That's how it's called out in the
That,
in the
yeah,
bill.
that's for the project area plan, which is intended to govern the use of incentive funds, but that's not intended to govern the land. The land would be just what we end up agreeing to relative to the ordinance and the development agreement. So that's why the bill talks in terms of a project area plan, which is kind of a concept you see often when you deal with RDA projects.
Okay.
I have one question regarding the slide that we're currently on. The street down towards the south end that's just west of United Steel on there, is that hinting at a future railroad crossing?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we'd have to work at something there. Yes, because that's an active line. You're correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take time now to do the public hearing. If you wish to speak on this item, you can submit a card, or you can approach the podium when we, after this first person speaks. I have a card from Emiliano Santiago, who wants to speak. If you'll approach the podium, make your comments. State your name, your own self, and then.
Emiliano Santiago. I have some surveys. We went surveying this weekend with the residents that live nearby the property. I live pretty close. We went this weekend to the VIP trailer park right across the street, and a lot of those residents, they are opposed to this zoning. They are afraid that they will be displaced, and they are also opposed to the idea of the MLB stadium, just because the way that's going on our side of town, on the west side, there's been mass displacements. And this type of zoning is not compatible with the neighborhood, having 400 feet. Those are like about the size of these buildings here in downtown. You know, and this is not even a guaranteed thing for the MLB, so why are we allowing this zoning to even be passed? And just to know that the city says that they're in favor of this project, but just know that the community isn't. We're gonna keep on surveying, gathering information, because, you know, this is a huge concern on the west side community, as we know that there's been mass displacements. And so we highly oppose this rezone, and we suggest you guys send a negative recommendation to the city council. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone else wish to speak? Go ahead. I'll speak if I don't have a card. That's totally fine. You have 2 minutes. Okay. State your name.
My name's Caroline Bagley. I'm a small business owner. I started my business in 1996 with my husband. We're manufacturer reps for commercial food equipment. We purchased a building at 1057 South 300 West in 1997. I own commercial property in different states, and my opinion of this is that it's hilarious that a developer is telling you people what they're going to do. And I understand that government is supposed to be a representation of the people, for the people, and by the people. But I think I'm 54 years old, and I have been in different states, in different meetings, as an observer in different things, and I do own 4 pieces of commercial property in different states. But I'm a small business owner. I'm not a big developer. And everything that I own, I have slowly paid for with blood, sweat, and tears. And then a city comes in and says, oh yeah, we're gonna change your zoning. Oh yeah, you need to change the facade of your building. Oh yeah, you need to do this. We're gonna take away all your street parking, which is what happened here in Salt Lake City. And all of you people that are sitting here on this committee, you need to be a small business owner if you're not. You need to be a small commercial property owner, because all of you all have no clue how difficult it is to be a small business owner in the United States of America. And I didn't know it either. I grew up with my dad being an attorney. We had a lot of money, but then I became a small business owner, and I have been schooled on the way these committees work, on the way these laws work, and how it is rigged for these people sitting here.
Thank you, ma'am. That's time.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item? You can approach the podium. You'll have 2 minutes. Please remember that one of our rules of decorum is to not respond to statements. But go ahead. You have 2 minutes. Please state your name.
Hi there. My name is Isaac Armaeus. I'm also a community member. This is a little bit over my head, but it does sound like some of the tax stuff is concerning, given that 6 of our schools were shut down in the West Side. So I am concerned about how any of that money being kicked back is going to affect the community that is nearby and in that district.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Sorry, really quick. Please don't clap. A response to a comment can demean somebody else's opinion about what that comment is. So we just want to have a clean slate of no responses to comments. Thank you very much.
Go ahead. You can approach the podium. Please state your name, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Cherry Garcias, and I think it is kind of funny how we're talking about decorum when there are livelihoods on the West Side that are in grave danger of being displaced. We talk about property lines and that this is mine, I can develop here, this is my line. However, when we talk about the neighbors adjacent, we don't talk about how these neighbors have to deal with the noise pollution, just the pollution, the high traffic, the low parking that's going to be happening in the area. And he's saying that nobody will be displaced, but this will inadvertently push people out of the city or out of the West Side. It is already happening right now where developments are left under construction for years. And then these people, they feel pushed out. They do feel pushed out. Why are we continuing to build these buildings as if you're trying to extend downtown to Rose Park? Why are we doing this? Is that the goal? Because if you do this, you are aiding in the displacement of not just people in Rose Park, but of people of color, low income as well. Be representatives. Do I have faith? No, I do not. Do your fucking job.
Any more comments? Thank you. We're going to close the public comment period now and go into executive session, which means this is the time for the commissioners to discuss the project with each other. We can ask clarifying questions if we need to of the staff and of the applicant, but that's at our discretion. I'm going to start first with giving the applicant a few minutes to respond to the comments if you want a few minutes to do that.
Thank you. Obviously, we are very focused on making a difference that's positive for the community. We are administering a number of programs in terms of grants and other ways to improve conditions that exist in that area. We are serious about picking a project that doesn't displace current home residents, and we think that increasing the supply of units in the area will be a positive, but we will obviously take all comments and look for ways to get our message out, and also to look for ways to improve what we're anticipating to be a fantastic project for not only the city but the broader area. Thank you.
Thank you. Now commissioners we can just talk about this project. There's a new motion sheet from today, which references items 1 through 8 on the staff report. So when someone wants to make a motion, please reference that motion sheet. I'd like to real quickly summarize what I heard in the public comment period, that there's some concern about the use and collection of taxes, gentrification of these neighborhoods, displacement of people who live there and love living there. There's concern about the height that's possible with a new zone, with new zoning rules, and how that will fit in with what is already there. So if any commissioners would like to speak, go ahead.
Sure, I would like to address some of those comments directly. So one of the members of the public brought up the school district issue, and the school district is separate from the city. So they are governed by their own school district elected officials, and the city has absolutely nothing to do with how they determine schools that are stay open, stay closed, how they take their tax increments and how they disperse them. And I also would like to really clarify, again, the city is not driving this project. The city is not driving this rezone. The city is put in a position by that House bill that came from the state legislature that, you know, we're working on a short timeline that is dictated to us. And I think we are all trying to do our best to meet that state imposed deadline in order to try and make a good project. But the city is not the one driving this. And but all of those issues that have been brought up that are, you know, tangential to this particular development, I think are concerns that we all share with you. I don't necessarily know how to address all of those things, you know, satisfactorily to the people in the community, but I think maybe an understanding of what's driving this, I hope will reframe expectations of what we can do and what we are doing. That's all
I wanted to also mention that my biggest concern and frustration has been that, again, we are facing an accelerated process that's been dictated to us by the Utah legislature. I may still support recommending denial, but as protesting that, but I still want to give good feedback because we anticipate that the city council will still move ahead on this. But I do have to say that I am very happy that a representative of the applicant is present, in contrast to one of the past processes that we did. So that is something that does give me less frustration. Some of the feedback that I do have, I really am not amenable to wanting to remove the riparian overlay at this point. I realize that what is envisioned for this section of the river is very urban. And I do mostly like the rendering, but I wish that there was more green along the river in that rendering. And I feel that the city, if we can negotiate a good design for what occurs along the river, that we may be amenable to changing that in the future. But for the time being, I still want to make sure that that is respected. And I believe that the design standards should apply along all the public streets. My biggest concern is regarding parking and transit. Since I am in the neighborhood, and for example, we just had the state fair going on a few weeks ago, I have been frustrated that the state entities in the area, both the fair park and also the state offices in the neighborhood, have not taken a very good advantage of having a tracks line going down North Temple. And it concerns me that this project may not adequately take advantage of transit. So I'm really looking for something that reduces the dependence on parking and having people drive there, and something that really encourages people to use transit. And yeah, it's whenever there's an event like the State Fair, North Temple ends up being clogged by people driving to events rather than taking advantage of the transit. And I realize that some of that may be economic considerations, that there's a lot of money off of the parking, but I am hoping that that is not the way that this stadium will be structured, and that the economics around it are structured. So that, I believe, covers my thoughts on this. Thank you.
As you know from kind of talking last time, I am also concerned about displacement, and I understand that displacement of the specific parcels is not a concern. But my concern is the increased value of the neighborhood and the way that that increased value will affect the neighborhood. I was kind of poking around on the census and the Ken Gardner website, and 43% of the west side are renters, and with the increased value in certain spaces in this area, it may incentivize changes in the way that their leases are functioning. So I want to be very conscious of that, and I think that being able to offset that with a specific number, a specific your plan is to create workforce housing in this development, and then also there will be this 20% tax increment of the land that is not the power district or the fairgrounds, which seems any tax increment is good, and I'm happy about that. Upon our last discussion, I was under the impression that it was the kind of area in general of all of the purple area. And so that then kind of re-escalates my concern that that displacement, there's this percent that will help offset some of that, and that's great. But I want to know how the area in the power district is going to help support the community in workforce housing, and I want a number associated with that. Whether that's, I want to know what percentage of units is going to support this community. Just another kind of Ken Gardner insight is that the 69% of the west side are from a minority demographic, and according to the 2023, the median income of that area is $30,000 less than the state median, which is $10,000. It's $10,000 less than the city median. So if we're going from the state median, like, this is a demographic that makes quite a bit less money than many other areas do in the state. And so I just want to be very conscious of putting a number on the amount of workforce housing that this development will create. So those are my main thoughts. I understand the kind of some flexibility in the riparian corridor, and I think working with public utilities I'm glad that Public Utilities is going to be able to be in conversation with you. I want a healthy outcome. And also with design standards along the Jordan River, I may be different from some of my colleagues, but I understand the impulse to say, like, the stadium may require different design standards. So I'm a little more flexible in that specific space than maybe some of my colleagues are. So those are my main thoughts. I think my displacement concern is clear. That's my main concern. Yeah.
I feel like we live in a big, nice city, and we should have nice things. We should have a clean river instead of a dirty river, and instead of a railroad that blocks everybody from passing in every direction, we should be able to have cute shops and restaurants and housing to go to. Those things look better than what's there, but also people should be able to live in the houses that they've always lived in, that they want to live in. I really appreciate the survey that we received from the public commenter, and that will be added to the public record so you can see it, so everybody can see it. I think they did a nice job of outreach in a case where we haven't really been able to do it because of the way that this process was set out. There hasn't been a lot of like, what do you think in this community? It was just kind of dictated. This is the outline. This is what's going to happen. It's going to happen by now, which is, as this is at least the second time this has happened this year. It feels like a lot for Salt Lake City just not to have a chance to talk to the residents. What do you want? What do you think? How can we make this better? But I appreciate that you are listening to us now and listening to the people who come to the meeting and give you their input. And I like the changes that have happened since the last time we talked about this project. I still really feel like I'm in support of the 8 suggestions that were outlined in the staff report. And I would also like to see one of those recommendations includes workforce housing on the premises, on the project. But also, as Commissioner Berry was talking about, that it seems like the benefit should be towards this neighborhood. This is the neighborhood that's going to be changing, even if people aren't moving out of the, the Ramada that's closed now. They're still going to be affected, and I feel like it's a good point to have that benefit happen to this neighborhood too. And then hopefully it's something that's good for the neighborhood, and we all want to go there and see a nice, clean river. But I'm in support of those 8 items plus the addition.
I just have a quick question for staff. Because this is moving so fast. So are a lot of the things that we kind of discussed tonight going to get lumped into number 8? And then you can communicate those to the city council, since they're the ones who will make the decision, not us.
Yeah, I'm taking notes and I'll re-listen to the meeting. And
Oh, I'm sorry. That's too bad for you. But I just want to clarify that those will then maybe just fall under number 8 that are concerns.
They will. In the transmittal, I'll have a section of what was discussed, recommendations from the commission, in addition to the recommendations from staff.
Right, and so,
Commissioner Berry, you'll want to include that in your motion. So like specific.
It needs to be included in the motion?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to say that I think it's, since the city council will be the ultimate decision makers on this, that in the interim, I think the applicant understands and has expressed acquiescence that the conversation on these things is still going to continue, but you have a good idea of some of the things the public and the commissions have brought up that I think still need discussion. And we'll just lump those in the motion, but to be covered by condition number 8. Okay.
Go for it. Go ahead. Okay. So just a couple things, and we're probably going to reiterate this ad nauseum, but just so maybe more members of the public can understand, This timeline has been dictated by the state legislature. And if we cannot get an agreement in place between the city and the developer, there is not an opportunity for the city to have any control over what happens in this area. Which is not to say that we're in favor of doing something rapidly or without public input or any of that, but it is to say that we feel to do what we can in order to work with a developer who has very willingly come to work with the city to engage in the process and get an agreement in place that will allow the city to have input and control over what is put in this area, where otherwise, if there's not an agreement in place by the end of December, the city would not have opportunity to do that. So it's a little bit unique in terms of, well, not a little bit, it's unique in terms of the process that you would normally see us going through up here. And I will say we certainly appreciate this developer coming in the way they have and being very cooperative in working with the city to try and work out these different points. I wonder if there's not some room to negotiate a few things that might not, I don't know, but might bring the city a little more comfort. For example, when we talk about design standards on the river, totally understood that the plan is to put an arena there. Worst case scenario, you liquidate the land, you dispose of the land, somebody else gets it, and they don't put an arena. What if we want some design standards there? I mean, think about maybe there are some creative ways for carve-outs that if it's an arena, there's more freedom. If it's not an arena, there are more checks and balances, something like that. And maybe on some of those other points, there's more room for some of that kind of flexibility and carve-out. I think there's been expressed by many of us, like, Utah's very fond of Larry H. Miller companies, and they've done a great job for us on so many things. But when we think worst case scenario, the Walmarts or whatever, we just want to feel some security that we maybe have some restraints in place to control what might happen if that were the case. None of us anticipate it. We don't want it to happen, but maybe look at where there's room for some of that. And then I would say I as well agree with all of the recommendations of staff at this point. And so to continue looking at those and design guidelines, I would say we need on any arterial street, private or public, particularly when we're looking at things which staff has highlighted, like lighting, massing, the length of buildings. And if these are things that you feel like, well, we're not going to do that anyway, then I think I pose the same question to you, then why not agree to just have it in the ordinance? So if you're not going to be making, 500-foot long buildings, then just say, okay, we're not going to do that and put it in the ordinance.
So I do appreciate you being here and listening. I will push back a little bit on the kind of idea of expediency. Obviously, we are stuck in this position because of the bill, but that was passed in February, and it,
Indeed.
7 months later that we got this application, and so it gives us only this one session and then right into council, and there's no time to do it. I think that if there's no reason that it couldn't have come in. I mean, the original proposal was basically like just a list of the laws you didn't want to follow, and so it could have been in March, and we could have been having this conversation for a long time and trying to figure out what would be good for the city if that input was sought after. I think it's important to think about this as kind of in two parts, because at least in how I interpreted it, like there's the development of this baseball stadium, and then there's the development of everything else. And my biggest worry from that is that how the bill states, it's very clear that everything else is secondary. That it's not that there's this opportunity and we wanted to do this thing here because it's here. It's that we want a baseball stadium, and so we're going to build a city to pay for it. And like Commissioner Scheer talked about, I think that gives me worries about the long-term outlook for it, and it's why it's hard to kind of sign on with anything without some vision of what it is. Because since everything else is, the kind of, the baseball stadium be like 15 acres, so like the other 80 acres, if fundamentally that is a vehicle to create this baseball stadium, I think the reason that it's hard to nail down what is going to be there is because it's hard to say what exactly will make that most possible. And so I worry about that because it does leave it very open. I think that I agree that the land use requirements are probably the most binding thing that we can add at this point to actually guide the development of that area. And so I think that some of the ones that talked about last time should really be removed and would give me a little bit more comfort in going with it, like light manufacturing, vehicle rental agency, warehouses, and wholesale distribution, because those are all things that, if you can put in there's like an electricity tax, maybe you put a server farm in there, or like maybe you put an Amazon wholesale place in there, or what. And I worry about what is going to be the simplest way to fund this. The other thing that wasn't talked about before, but I think should probably get removed, is golf course. I hope that's not the plan. Yeah, but that is one of the permitted uses, and I think that would be a very poor use of that land, so I think we should cut that out. Let's see. I brought it up last time, and I went and looked in, and it is part of the law, so it's not something that we can like cut out here, but part of it that the worst part in my mind, and the part that worries me most, is that you can buy a parcel within 200 feet, and that becomes part of the same zoning. And Larry H. Miller also has the right to transfer that right with any property. So you could, someone can buy something and kind of start spiderwebbing out from there, and changing the zoning as long as they can get something within 200 feet. You buy every 7th house or whatever and jump across to some other part of the city. I worry about that expansion, and I would really like to see some kind of check on that, because I don't think that's the intent, but I worry about that kind of becoming the reality of it. I asked about the clarifying if there is no decision, whether it just becomes kind of Wild West free-for-all, or if it goes back to the advisory board, because I think that is an important difference, and that it means that us saying no doesn't mean that a nuclear power plant's going to get built there or whatever, that there is, it reverts to someone else. And so, we aren't I feel not quite as obligated to push this through because of the kind of dire consequence. It means that it's on someone else, and then it's on them, kind of thing. Could you explain a little bit about the project area plan, what you were saying, and how that differs from kind of a overall site plan or master plan?
No problem. Thank you, Commissioner. A project area plan there's probably 20 of them downstairs on the first floor of this building with RDA. And what it is it's an area where you identify a geographic area for redevelopment. And then you identify a series of goals that would be pursued in that redevelopment. And then you identify what might be available financial resources that would come to help further those goals. So there's a draft project area plan pending with the district now. It's about 5-6 pages. It doesn't look like a site plan, but it does call out that same purple area we've been talking about, and then talks about some of the same kind of goals that are identified in the bill. So it's intended to be a guide to the people that administer the tax increment. It's not intended to have a zoning goal relative to, guiding the site development or platting or something like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I misunderstood that. What I was going to suggest, because I thought that was more of could kind of serve as a master plan in my concept, if that is kind of an overall site plan and just like a rough we want this many square feet of retail and this many houses or whatever. My thought was that then we could, that could be something you could bring and present to us and present to the city council, because planning kind of is supposed to be this long outlook thing that kind of filters down from this master plan. And so I really want something up at that level so that we can kind of reference back to, because the fact that there is nothing up there is what makes having such loose guidelines worrisome. So I think that's all.
So I do have some comments to make too that I think go sort of along with Commissioner Scott's comments. I actually am very concerned about what happens if the project doesn't happen. And I like the project. I think it looks great. I would hope that we get it done. I'm all in favor of baseball stadium. As George Carlin says, baseball is nice. And, so it is a sport that I think a lot of us can get behind. And I do think that the stadium development in this location would provide some economic opportunities, perhaps, and displacement is an issue. Environmental concerns are an issue as well. One minor thing that I think would help is to actually introduce a maximum setback from all streets, so that it's like 15 feet. So if that's the case, you can't put a parking lot in front of a building, which it isn't, that's indicated now, because 15 feet is not enough to put a parking lot in. It's 15 feet from any street or from any publicly accessible open space. So if you're on a plaza, you can, that's okay. But if you're just on a street, you can't have any kind of setback that's larger than 15 feet. So it makes buildings sort of come right up to the edge. That could be even smaller if the building were shorter. So that might solve some issues down the road if somebody's trying to develop a shopping center or something like that. In terms of the other kind of long-term effects, I would like to see, and we have sort of, what's happened that bothers me probably the most is this being exempted from many city plans, specifically the North Temple Boulevard plan. I would like to see that whenever this site plan or master plan is approved, that it be incorporated as part of the North Temple Boulevard plan, so that any subsequent owner would have to deal with the North Temple Boulevard plan as a part of their planning. Now, when you incorporate something as in the master plan, it's not nearly as specific as, here's where this building goes. It is high density, low density, medium density, mixed use, and so forth. So I would like to see that happen, and I think that's a very reasonable request, that we just incorporate the master plan as it is approved into the North Temple Boulevard plan. And second, sort of going along with that, if the current applicant is unable to develop the project for any reason, the property will be rezoned consistent with the North Temple Boulevard plan for any subsequent owner. So we have the plan, we've approved the plan, a subsequent owner will have to deal with the zoning that's consistent with that, which could be 600 feet, or it could be an MU 16 or something like that. So whatever it is, or it could be a D3, something consistent with that master plan. So I think those two things taken together might resolve some of the, geez, what's going to happen in the future thing. And they're very consistent with what you've already presented to us.
If no one else has any input, I'd like to make an attempt at a motion. This is going to be a long motion, so listen in. Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission recommends that the city council deny this zoning map and text amendment for the following reasons. One, that it is not currently included in any master plans for the city. And two, that the expedited process that has been dictated to us is not beneficial to Salt Lake City and is not respectful to Salt Lake City's West Side neighborhoods. However, should the City Council choose to adopt this zoning map and text amendment, the Commission recommends that it be with conditions 1 through 8 listed in the staff report, and with consideration also to the input given in this meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Mike Christensen. Looking for a second or some other. Second from Commissioner Scott. Any discussion? Amendments?
I am concerned that this motion is a no and a yes all wrapped into one. And we're not.
I agree.
It's not clear. It's not. We've never encountered that particular approach before, so I'm not really sure how to handle it. But I'm not necessarily in favor of it, mainly because it is on one hand a no, but then hey, maybe a yes. So I think we should be more clear to the City Council on what we're recommending.
I agree with Commissioner Berry.
So we can take a substitute motion or an amendment to that motion, I think. Those are our options.
Well, not an amendment, but it would be, you could either take a vote and have a clean decision on that, or you can have, somebody can make a substitute motion that we vote on.
Right.
That's correct.
Right. That's what I said. Anybody want to do a substitute motion? Okay. We're going to. Oh, do you want a second?
If you guys would, I would like to, yes, I would like to make a substitute motion.
I would, just before we do this, I would kind of recommend that we actually take a vote on this motion because it's, because it is kind of convoluted. And I wouldn't want any motion you would make to get. I just feel like we should have a clear decision on that first. That's just my point in the discussion, but you can also feel free to do that.
I'm happy with that. I think that's fine with me.
Let me say thank you to Commissioner Mike Christensen for speaking up. Thank you. It can be hard. Okay, we're going to take a vote now. Commissioner Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Landon Krasik.
No.
Commissioner Scheer.
No.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
No.
Commissioner Gale.
No.
Commissioner McCall Christensen.
No.
I'm also going to vote no. So that's that doesn't pass. That was 6 no's and 2 yeses. So we can look for a new motion or more discussion.
Before I make a motion, I would like to as you guys know, I would like to have a number associated with workforce housing built into this. And I don't know that I have the knowledge base enough to be able to kind of determine that like 10% or whatever we associate with that. And is there a number that you guys would like to see associated with workforce housing built into this development that you would like to recommend to me?
I think there's a couple of difficulties with that. One is the definition of workforce housing is not all that clear. We do have definitions of affordability, I believe. Second, how would that be implemented? In the first project, they would do 10%, or in one of the projects, they would do 100%. And it's kind of like unclear how, I mean, if a project's, if we're just talking about one building, that's clear. But if we're talking about multiple buildings over a large site, probably over a 10-year development time horizon, then it becomes a more difficult assessment to make.
Yeah, I think
I'm with you all the way. It's just a difficult thing to process.
I think what I'm thinking is percentage of the completed project. So if they end up not being able to finance the workforce housing until the final phase of their development, then I'm okay with it as long as we have affordable housing that is built into the development as a whole. So if there is a percentage of land that we say is dedicated, or a percentage of units that are, a percentage of units of the total development, then that feels better.
That's great. I think that's clear to staff. I think that's something you would wrap into, have staff include all of the points brought up tonight's meeting to be transmitted as further discussion and recommendation to the city council to consider. And how you just spelled that out, I think, is very clear that staff can incorporate that into the recommendation.
Okay.
I think just one thing on that, there's nothing in here that means that a single apartment will be built. So.
Yes, I think that's true. If they were to fulfill their thesis statement, then housing is included. And I understand the concern of that might not happen. There may be a change. And I think there is some good faith that I would just like to see happen of it with this developer. I mean, they don't, of just if in so much that we do have our hands tied to some degree, then I think what we have to go on is their statement of the purpose of the district, and the purpose of the district does include housing. And so
it's tough.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand why, and I wanted to
completely, and I think that's a fair statement, completely.
The recommendations of staff does have workforce housing in the recommendations already.
Yeah, I just think for me,
how would you like to strengthen that?
I want to know. I want to say have a percentage number built into the into the term sheet. So when the term sheet is before the city council, I would like to have a number associated with workforce housing, and that might be associated with 80% AMI or whatever, but I want to know, the final development is going to have units that are affordable according to our standards of 80% AMI or whatever. So I think, let me just take a whack.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think
real quick on that. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
What Commissioner Barry mentioned earlier, I think would be a more effective way to do that, to say that the money that is set aside for workforce housing is used in this area, because that means that regardless, if there is any development, there's tax increment that has to be used for workforce housing in this area.
That money, though, is not coming from this private land development. It's not.
Yeah.
It's coming from a whole different state-owned land. So that's, they are kind of separate.
Oh, never mind. Thought I solved it.
No. Clarify. So 20% is coming from other state lands, but this district is producing some tax increment. It's not 20% that will be earmarked for housing, affordable housing.
20% is hardwired in. There's increment that is made available to the city from this particular district.
But from this district, but it's not. It's a much smaller percentage.
That's right. And we could have, we could look at language about we'll go and try and persuade or obtain approval to use it in this area. I mean, that's our idea.
Right. So that was my understanding. So I just wanted to.
Can I make a quick clarification? The bill does not say that a certain percentage of that tax increment comes back to the city. The city is only reimbursed for city services required to provide to future development at the site. That's it. That's all we get from the tax increment.
My understanding is that's being negotiated right now. If that.
Okay, so I think to clarify what I
right,
had
but
said
none
earlier.
of that is for housing. That is for municipal services, water, police, fire, basic things.
But the
not
last
housing.
comment, Commissioner Berry, just so you're aware, and we have communicated this previously and would be willing to communicate again, that fund, which is whether it's state-owned or not, is in the city and it's in this area, should be used and devoted in this area so that the affordable housing funds generated from this area don't end up escaping outside of the city or to some other part of the state.
Excellent. I think my recommendation to clarify is that type of language be put into the development agreement, that the city council take an interest in that. So I'm just going to say, Commissioner Krasik, I think as you take a stab at this motion, because there's a specific line item for the workforce housing, that's where you would articulate, if you wish to, your desire for the city council to look at this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that you have to spell out everything that we've talked about tonight, but that poor Amanda has to listen to this meeting again and pick out what those recommendations are, as further clarified in point 8 in staff's recommendations, to be considered. And she could spell those out a little bit better when this gets transmitted to the city council.
Okay. Okay, so I would like to make a motion. This motion is for PLN PCM 2024-00707, mixed use zoning. Oh, nope, this is the wrong one. Sorry, everyone. Thank you. Oh, I actually don't have the new one. Thank you. Okay, so this motion is for PLN PCM 2024-00982 JRF district. The motion is to recommend approval with conditions. Based on the information presented and in discussion, I move that the commission recommends that the city council adopt the zoning map and text amendment with the following conditions as listed in the staff report. That is referencing conditions 1 through 8 with note on condition 8 dealing with workforce housing, that 10% of the district in question is dedicated to housing that is 80% AMI or changed within the conversations with staff, and that we also have the 20% tax increment from the area that the developer was talking about is dedicated to affordable housing in the neighborhood in general. And that is what I've got.
Friendly amendment?
Yes, please.
First, we need a second. And
I'll
then-
second that.
There you go.
Friendly amendment. I would also like to add another condition that as a part of the zoning, the maximum setback from any building from a street or public place is 15 feet. And another condition, that once the site plan or master plan is approved, that it becomes a part of the North Temple Boulevard plan.
Do you accept?
I accept.
And I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Krasik, a second by Commissioner Mike Christensen, and an amendment that's been accepted.
I have a discussion point to that friendly amendment. Is your 15 feet required setback meant to replace the staff's condition about design review along all streets?
No, that's still part of the staff's recommendation.
Did you say maximum setback?
Maximum setback, right, correct. Maximum, it could be 0.
I have a discussion point. I may have missed it. Was there an addition on the item 8 that there be consideration for the concerns addressed and discussed this evening?
I would love to add that to our thing.
Okay.
Our motion. So adding to
So
the
another
motion.
formal friendly amendment.
Friendly amendment that we add that?
Yes, I accept.
I'll second that.
We want to enumerate those because I think it would be better if we did, if there were.
No.
We are, yeah.
That's
we
where
are
she's
reasons. And perhaps another friendly amendment.
Love it.
But perhaps not, we'll see. I don't think, and maybe staff can comment on this, that it's really in our purview to decide how tax increment is used. Is that part of what we decide? So I don't think we can have in our
Definitely
motion
not.
how the tax increment is used or not, but maybe it doesn't hurt anything. I don't know.
Sorry, what was the question?
I don't think it's in our, is it in our purview to say how tax increment is used?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so. So my friendly amendment would be to take that out.
I have a clarifying question. Is that in the part of where Commissioner Krasik was delineating how many units and at what AMI? Because my particular point wasn't how it's used. It's already dictated in how it's written, but the geographic disbursement of it. So I'm just clarifying. I just want to know which part you're trying to rescind.
There was the mention of the 20% increment, and I don't think it's in our, I'm going to turn to staff again. I don't think it's in our purview to decide where tax increment is used or.
So, the state law that established this has already decided that the city doesn't get to have a say in how the tax increment is used.
Correct.
To submit to the Fair Park Board our estimated costs of providing essential city services, and they get to choose whether they're going to reimburse the city for that. So we don't get to, we can send them what we think it should be used, and our city council, I'm sure, will be doing that. But I don't know that it's necessarily appropriate to put that in this motion because it's one outside of the planning.
I feel like we may be conflating. I just want us to be really clear because we've had a lot of talk tonight. So the part that I had brought up earlier isn't dictating how the tax increment is used in the other state land parcel. That's already set out in that language by the state. The state says
Parcel it is too. All of the boundary of the entire area it is.
So
okay. So is it? It's. I don't know that it's bad to ask the city council to look at keeping that in this area. The city council will decide what they want in the development agreement, and we have some differing, it seems, ideas of what that 20% increment from other state lands, which is other state parcels, not this district, not the state-owned lands, but there's a section of other state owned lands that the tax increment is already set in language at 20% go to like affordable type housing.
Perhaps
Doesn't
it is
spell
enough
out.
to.
Director Norris
There.
is saying the city has no say in how any of that is used.
That's correct. We can try to influence the Fair Park Board.
And that's kind of all that we're saying, like, city council, hey, maybe take a look at this. I don't think we're directing anything.
Yeah. Now, you can recommend that the city council include in the development agreement some requirement for affordable housing within the development site.
Which I think is what we've done.
Determine that.
Yeah.
But
through that
without
negotiation.
talking about where the funding's going to come from.
Right.
Because we
That's
don't
the
know where
part.
the funding's going to come from.
That's
It
the
could
part.
come from the developer.
Yes.
And all the profits he's going to make on this great big piece of land and the baseball stadium and blah, blah, blah. Right?
Fair enough. I mean, I think I think our goal is to ask the city council to consider looking at this and as a reflection of our concerns as well as community concerns of displacement and of that effect of the surrounding community.
Right. And that what I'm saying is that is regardless, of tax increment is or where it goes. That is something negotiated between the city and the developer. So just like we do with the community benefit ordinance, it's a way to capture that community benefit through that development agreement, which they have submitted a term sheet for. So if the motion is to include some affordable housing, just stated, at least 10% of the total housing units in the development at a minimum of 80% AMI or maximum of 80% AMI, that would go into that, what's in this document called the term sheet. That's all you need to say. You don't need to talk about the tax increment because it's irrelevant to what your ask of the council is.
Okay, fair enough.
I think the last thing we had was an offer of a friendly amendment.
Do you mind if I give
Could you
an
just
attempt at restating?
Please go
a
for
motion?
it.
Can
Would
we
you
do that?
mind
Do we need to
bringing up
with
that list of 8 recommendations? Okay, this is as to PLN PCM 2024-00982 JRF District. Based on the information presented and discussion, I move the commission recommend that the city council adopt this zoning map and text amendment with the following conditions as listed in the staff report, plus additional conditions we've discussed at this meeting. 1, the applicant shall continue to work with public utilities on the applicability of the riparian corridor overlay. 2, public utilities master plans and transportation master plans remain applicable to the JRF district. 3, the applicant will follow mitigation measures as dictated in the airspace impact study. 4, a minimum open space of the entire project must be dedicated as open space and accessible to the public, which is currently set at 10% open space in the proposed code. 5, a percentage of the workforce housing shall be provided within the project boundaries, and we'd like to suggest that that be 10. Commissioner?
That
10%?
10%.
10% of the total housing developed be affordable housing at the level of 80%?
80%
AMI?
or lower.
Or lower. 6, design standards shall apply to all buildings facing public streets and the Jordan River. The standards shall be updated to include lighting, entry features, parking garage, specifications, and limits on building facade lengths. 7, mid-block walkways associated with additional building heights shall be a minimum of 15 feet wide. 8, concerns raised by the Planning Commission during October 9th, 2024 briefing shall be addressed. 9, concerns raised by the Planning Commission tonight shall be addressed. 10, Commissioner Scheer.
Can we enumerate those 8 and 9?
We're going to rely on staff to do that. They've indicated that they'll re-listen to the meetings.
Okay.
Do you want, so
I think it would be better if those who are advocating specific things go ahead and say it right now. Just like I'm going to say the 15 feet minimum setback, maximum setback.
Item 10 is the 15-foot minimum setback.
Maximum setback from any
setback,
public
pardon
street
me.
or publicly accessible open space, from any street or publicly accessible open space.
Thank you.
And
11,
the incorporation of the approved site plan or master plan for the district into the North Temple Boulevard plan of the city.
That is my motion.
I feel like this is technically a substitute motion, and I will second it.
It is a substitute motion.
We have a substitute motion by Commissioner Gale. Any second to it?
Yes.
Yeah, I second it.
We have a substitute motion by Commissioner Gale and a second by Commissioner Krasik. We're going to vote on it, the substitute motion. Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
Commissioner McCall Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik.
Yes.
Commissioner Shearer.
Yes.
Commissioner Barry.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
No.
Commissioner Burrows will vote yes. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 yeses for the substitute motion. 1 no. That passes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we're going to take a break for 5 minutes. We'll come back at 7:48. We're going to end our break and go back into session now. We're on our last agenda item, which is a zoning consolidation project. I'll have the planners introduce themselves and give us their presentation.
All right, thank you. I'm Daniel, and we also have Chrissy here from the planning department as well. So we're back to discuss the MU zoning consolidation. We were back here in September with some questions for commission direction. And based on that direction, we've made some changes and want to give you an overview of those changes tonight and hold an additional public hearing. So the first major change is the addition of the transitional overlay zone. So we're proposing to apply the transitional overlay to all of the former general commercial and M1 properties that are proposed for rezoning to the MU zones. We realize that the MU zoning standards might not work well for a large number of the commercial properties, and we touched on that a little bit at the last meeting. And the transitional overlay is designed to give some of these properties some relief from the zoning standards, but also build in a conditional use process to help capture some of the negative impacts from some of the higher intensity uses. Because we're proposing the transitional overlay, we're also we're proposing to non-conforming uses, since most of those uses will no longer be made non-conforming. So we were originally proposing that non-conforming uses could be expanded without a limit within their existing single property. We're now eliminating that change and preserving the existing non-conforming use expansion limit, which is 25% of the square footage up to square feet. So what the transitional overlay does, uses as permitted conditions, a side yard. It also allows for some reduction in the design standards, like those for entrances, but requires additional front yard landscaping in place of those. And it does also reach 100,000 square to utilize those same standards, have similar issues as the more intensive commercial properties. We're hoping this balances the desire to more mixed uses with the reality of the existing businesses on the ground. So Based on your feedback at the last commission meeting, we took another look at the ground floor height issue, where a taller ground floor requirement might squish those upper residential floors. We explored some more options and are proposing an approach that helps incentivize taller floor heights while also trying to limit height impacts on neighborhoods. So the first part is where we're proposing to narrow where the 12-foot ground floor height is required to only those properties that are required to have a commercial ground floor use, like in the Sugar House core. So the ground floor height wouldn't apply to just anywhere, like essentially most of the areas wouldn't be impacted by the ground floor height. But then to compensate for the ground floor height and its squishing impacts, we're proposing an allowance to increase the total building height when you're including a commercial use space on the ground floor that exceeds that 8-foot exceeds a 8-foot height limit. So for any additional ground floor height over 8 feet, you get an equivalent increase in your building height. We're hoping that incentivizes rather than penalizes properties for including commercial uses on the ground floor with usable floor heights. And then I'm going to hand it over to Chrissy.
Thank you. So at the meeting on September 25th, staff discussed with the commission the potential of, or the question of downzoning certain properties that staff had noticed that the proposed zoning might not be appropriate. Through that discussion with the commission, we received direction that there was equity concerns with selectively downzoning certain properties. So we took that direction and we have applied a straight across, like for like rezone for all properties in the MU consolidation. And so I wanted to point out some of those key changes. So this includes the M1 areas that were MU5. They have now been changed to MU6 to better align with the property's current development potential. 2 small areas, Zone CG along West Temple and 2100 South, were changed from MU5 to MU11. And then TSA properties in the Euclid neighborhood that were discussed at that last meeting were proposed at MU3, and they have now been changed to MU5 to match that existing zoning and development potential. And then split zone properties. So through staff's review, we did notice a few split zone properties that warrant just outright changing the zoning to match. So in this case, the CB zone. These parcels are 37 West, 1700 South, and 2800 West, 1700 South. So split zoning means that there's 2 zones applied to the parcel. And to streamline the zoning, staff is proposing just to apply the single MU3 zone classification across the whole parcel. So according to city code, if a parcel is split zoned and it's divided by less than 30 feet, then the entire parcel is considered zoned as a majority district. So this would essentially just be a cleanup and effectively how the ordinance is applied anyways. And then other changes. So several technical and formatting corrections have been made since the September 25th review drafts. These changes are generally minimal and are listed in the staff report, although there are many. They're generally minimal in the staff report. They things like correcting references to other code sections, removing conflicting language, and then a few technical edits that were necessary. Like one example was adding the pharmacy land use to the parking requirements table. And then a noticing error. So this was included as an addendum to your staff report. This week we became aware that there was a noticing error, that when we gathered our addresses to mail our original notice, there was a data collection error, and this specific section by the ballpark was not included in that notice. And so to make sure that we are meeting state noticing requirements, we have now sent that notice out today to make sure that they get that notice, but we are requesting that in the motion, which we've updated a new motion sheet, this area is excluded so that we can meet those noticing requirements. And we plan to be back on November 13th for recommendation on these properties. And so very quick presentation today, but we are recommending that the Planning Commission make a recommendation to the City Council to adopt the zoning text and map amendments, with the exception of the properties bound by Meade Avenue on 1300 South and 200 West and West Temple, with the following conditions. The first is that planning staff may make minor non-substantive corrections to the ordinance as needed before its adoption by the City Council. And then planning staff may make minor technical adjustments to the map boundaries, such as aligning boundaries with parcel lines as needed before its adoption by the City Council. And then in instances where the dated parcel list, which was attachment G, and the map are in conflict, the map would prevail. And these are just kind of covering where we've data errors and things like that when we find them. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Let's do time for clarifying questions from the commission, and I'll start with mine. On your consideration number 4, the split zoning, how did you find those 2 properties, and what if other properties come up in the next, that are in the same situation the next month or next year or something like that?
That's a good question. So we exported all of the parcels impacted by this rezone, and we're able through that export process to identify which parcels were split zoned. And then Kelsey and I went through each one of them, an aerial image of each one to see how they were split zoned. And these were the only 2 that we found that we thought that it warranted just making the whole zone apply.
I would just add that the others identified included a district outside of the scope of the MU. So it was maybe MU3 and an R1, or MU and a, I don't know, like D zone, so it was something outside of the scope of the consolidation. So we didn't touch those. We left those split zoned.
If someone comes to you and identifies, you just, in this action, you split zoned my property, next year, will they have to do like a rezoning process, or is there an administrative one to fix it?
It was already split zoned.
These 2 already were.
Yes.
And so they continue to be, but they're both in the MU.
Yeah, they're already split zoned,
Okay.
and an MU district applies to both of those zones that are on the parcel. So we're just proposing to create one straight MU zone.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions by?
Can we go back to the transition zone again?
You may have to do it.
So we had the transitional overlay before, is that correct?
Yes.
Right, and you're just adding, you're expanding the expansion limits, is that correct? Okay, I'm confused, obviously.
So with the original proposal, we were going just to delete the transitional overlay. It was mapped over some properties where it didn't even make sense to have. So we're still deleting those.
Okay.
And we reworked the transitional overlay altogether to be a transitional overlay focused on these like heavy commercial, light industrial uses instead.
Okay.
So, So on that, so does that change the intensity of buildings in this area for a so like I know that it changes like the kind of form of the outside of a building, but does it change the height as well? Does it keep the height closer to where it was, or
So the height wouldn't change for the zone. It does have reduced design standards that have to do with like the window glass and entry requirements, the modulation of the facade, but it doesn't impact heights. And it does add an additional setback for these uses of 10 feet. It's like a landscape setback around the outside of the properties, just to help serve as a buffer.
Okay.
I would just add that I think what the transitional overlay does successfully is it acknowledges those uses that Daniel specified. Some of the lighter manufacturing or somewhat heavier commercial uses where you have industrial assembly, automobile repair, et cetera. We have a whole list in the transitional overlay so that those aren't as severely impacted by the MU consolidation as they were originally.
So how are you defining the rear and side yards in this transitional overlay, given in the example of Costco, where the rear of the building faces the front of the street? Typically we do the front yard as the street. So how are you defining then the rear and the side yards as you've spelled them out?
So the front yard could continue to be the part of the property that is adjacent to the public street. The side and the rear would still be those portions of the property that don't touch a public street.
Okay.
I have a number of questions on the actual text. Should we do that after or now? Or?
That's a good question. Let's do the public hearing. Okay. We Is that okay? Okay. We'll have lots of time to talk after. We did not close the public hearing last time. It was continued from our last meeting, so we're going to keep going with it now. I have several cards. When I call your name, you can go to the podium, state your name, and then you have 2 minutes to speak. Cindy Cromer is first, then Ron T, then Bernie Awa.
Hi, my name is Cindy Cromer. First, I want to focus on setbacks. We made a mistake in 1995 with the zoning ordinance. The setback for the extractive industry zone was 0, and the abutting property had to absorb the impacts of what I think is the most aggressive zone ever, the extractive industry zone, which basically removes the land. And most of that adjacent land was public property. So the impacts of the zone got to be absorbed by the adjacent public property. And that's led me to think about what these 0 setbacks mean for abutting property owners. So fast forward to now, when you consider a 0 or minimum setback for infill development, the burden falls on the existing nearby development. There's no protection for access to natural light or views, but these minimal or near 0 setbacks also threaten the existing structures themselves. In the 1970s, the demolition of the Bryant Intermediate School shook 2 historic buildings apart. I happen to be responsible for them as the property manager. There seemed to be no recourse given the status of the school district relative to mine as the property manager. It was collateral damage. So I'm sure that you view the reduced setbacks as an opportunity for increased density and therefore increased property taxes. To me, these minimal setbacks threaten nearby existing structure which constitute major investments for other people, and they are often character-defining buildings for the community. They are also often constructed of unreinforced masonry. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next comment is by Ron T, then Bernie Awa, then Sue M. State your name, please.
My name is Ron Tamu. Thank you for giving me an opportunity finally to say something. You rezoned a piece of property next to us to build a 70-story building, completely blocking out the sun on both the south and west side. Our property has all kinds of greenery, greenhouse and whatever, completely blocked us out. It's interesting how they actually went out of their way to ignore us and to keep us out of the process. You put a little sign up on next to us where the building site was going to be at the library. We went. First people there, that was us, no show. Then they were supposed to have a little meeting with the community. They went out of their way not to invite us. A person that lives a block and a half away from us couldn't get a hold of us. We've had over 200 media inputs from TV stations, National Geographic, BBC, Der Spiegel, from all over the world. Anybody wants to get a hold of us, they pick up the phone, they get a hold of us. They can write us an email. This guy living not even 2 blocks away from us can't find us. You guys are doing some great things, but unfortunately, you guys want to build these big buildings for profit. You could build smaller buildings and make a nice impact on the community. Instead, you're putting these huge things in the middle of people's property where you can't even park. You go from 40% of the people, 40% of parking down to 20, right? 20. That means 80% of the people that live in a big high-rise completely devastate the community. Nobody's going to be able to park anywhere. And it's just getting really weird that it has to do, we tried to get a hold of the mayor, they didn't call us back, emails, nothing. And unfortunately, contractors can make gigantic contributions, but we're a church. So we can't financially engage anybody to get any type of response to anything we have to say because we don't have their interest in mind. I mean, I guess this is the city of
Thank you, sir.
Maryland.
That's time.
Thank you, sir. Can I ask him a question? I just want to know what property he's talking about.
I can answer that for you. He's talking about Summum. I'm here to voice my objection again, like last time, on this proposed project.
Will you state your name?
I'm sorry, Bernie Ayoa.
And where is the property you're talking about?
It is on the corner of 700 West and 840 South, Genesee Avenue.
Thank you, sir.
The proposed zoning and the zoning change that happened 3 years ago is setting the stage for a burden to be placed on our religious practice. Sunlight is a very integral part of our religion, and it's part of our meditations. We also grow spiritual plants. These zoning changes are going to allow a very tall building to be built along the west and south sides of our property, and that's going to impact our religious practice. And I just want to point out that Utah passed a law this year, the bill SB 150, which is a bill that is supposed to guarantee the freedom of religious practice. And what we feel that is going on here is the city is burdening our religion, and it is in violation of this law. And you can go look that up. The bill is SB 150. It was signed by Governor Cox in March. Anyway, that's all I really have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Sue M., and then Ashley K., then Alex H. Please tell us your name.
Sure. Hello, my name is Sue Manu, and I am here as a member of Summum and to protest this rezone. We have been a part of that neighborhood for close to 50 years and have beautified our corner of property. And many people who come to us and neighbors tell us how lovely it is. We tried to build a meditative, peaceful sanctuary. And now you are impinging upon everything we have tried to do over the last several years. Our property depends upon the sun. Our meditations, our greenhouse will be totally in dark, as well as our property during the winter hours. They've shown us the shadow, and it covers our property. Our pyramid depends on the energy from the sun, and it is what gives us and our property life. We cannot worship the way we wish to worship with these huge monstrosities, I call them, in our neighborhood, not to mention the noise and people trying to hop over our fences in order to see what we are. We've had people come on our property and lift the door of the pyramid while we were in session with the class. Now you tell me what's going to happen if we have that many people surrounding us. So we are opposed to this, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next commenter is Ashley K., then Alex H., then Ben E. Okay. Ashley didn't indicate support or opposition, so Alex H., and then Ben E. Alex, if you need extra time, you can have it. Thank you.
Stroke. Yeah. All right. Perfect.
Oh, do you want me to?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Do you want to put the last one up? We can read them. Or, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Alex Hammery. I live at 310 South 3rd East in the historic Altadena building.
I was a mountain climber in Utah and had a stroke in 2016. Please read my comments posted on these boards. I really thrive in the sunlight that comes into my unit. I support landmark building setback. This requirement is intended to promote a transition in scale between new buildings and lower scale historic buildings. This applies to properties abutting local historic landmark sites that include buildings less than 50 feet in height. This does not apply when a right-of-way separates the properties. New buildings shall be designed so that no portion of the building within 25 feet of the abutting property line is taller than the height of a 45-degree angular plane extending from the top of the landmark building toward the new building. This is the example from our code. I support F, the maximum length of street-facing facades. Do you want me to read the? Yeah. Okay. This requirement sets the maximum length of a single street-facing facade of a structure. The purpose of this is to have building massing that is more consistent with the historic development pattern of buildings in Salt Lake City. No street-facing building wall may be longer than specified along a street line according to Table 21A 37060 of this chapter. For buildings longer than 75 feet, the space between additional buildings along the street and a development site shall be at least 15 feet and include a pedestrian walkway of at least 6 feet. I support G, upper floor step back, 1. Upper level step back, street facing facades of buildings over 85 feet in height shall have an upper level step back within a minimum depth as specified in Table 21A 37060 of this chapter. The step back can be at any height of the building above the ground floor. This provision shall be considered complied with if a front or corner side yard setback is provided that is equal to or greater than the requirement in Table 21A 37060. I do not support easing rear yard setbacks for new buildings adjacent to historic properties, as the historic 30-foot rear yard setback currently in place protects our historic buildings from environmental and psychological blight, as the need for light impacts both human and plant life. I urge the inclusion of the National Park Service document protecting a historic structure during adjacent construction as required during zoning, including checklist. And I can pass this around the commission so that you can see. Thank you for your consideration of these elements so that we can keep Salt Lake City wonderful.
Thank you. Ben E. is up next, then Adam G., then
My name is Ben
Ian.
Engel. I live on 100 South between 2nd and 3rd East. I often go out and pick up trash in the neighborhood to keep things looking better, to keep a clean environment. Part of the downside of that is I periodically pick up dead birds. This last summer, I found that there were a lot more dead birds than I was seeing like previous years, and I was really curious as to what the issue was, and I had a difficult time finding out any way to be able to investigate it. I finally was able to speak with the Wildlife Center of Salt Lake City, that they'll take the birds and they'll be able to examine them in order to be able to rule out some causes of death. One of the things that often kills a lot of birds in a city is that they run into the windows. And I think that this is commonly what everybody thinks is the cause of this. And this may be the main contributing factor, but we're still trying to collect data. I don't know if we've got some kind of new toxins. Maybe it has to do with the fentanyl that we have on the street. Maybe we have people that are poisoning birds. It's hard to say. A lot of the birds don't have trauma, a lot of them do. One of the things that I've learned in the process of this is like New York City passed regulations requiring bird-friendly design in building designs, where often glazing windows or have some sort of a treatment that makes it to where birds don't run into them, makes it to where they recognize it. And I just think that it's a very low-hanging fruit, very low, inexpensive thing and a consideration that we can put in. It's on, sorry, I saw that the glass stuff was in on line 165 of the new standard design standards, section C glass, sections 2 and 3 for the upper floor glass and reflective glass. Just thought that while we're rewriting these documents, that it might be a good opportunity to consider what it was like that they've done in New York City. Thanks. Oh,
Thank you.
Also, before we had a consideration for the downsizing of some of those areas to M3 in order to be able to make it to where that they would have those abutting considerations with larger scale areas. I think it would make a lot of sense to have similar kind of things when we have abutting zones to make transitional effects a little bit easier. I know when we were talking historical buildings have those kinds of considerations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Adam G. and Ian P. are next speakers.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Adam Goff. I'm an attorney with Bennett Taylor Johnson & Deere, here to represent our client, Madbrook Donut Company. We've been following the proposal for some time now, and we've been really impressed with the clear effort and the thought that the U.S. Commissioners and the staff has been putting into this project. We've made a couple of public comments addressing some of the concerns that we have of how this will, the high burden that the design standards might cause businesses like ourselves, like Madbrook. And we've been impressed with the proposal behind me, this transitional overlay for non-conforming uses. We were pretty excited when we heard about that, and we're now concerned that that will address the problem, the same problem we have for large retailers and for businesses that have non-conforming uses, but not address the same problem for businesses like ourselves. We're a commercial bakery, and as far as we're aware, that is an approved use for MU 11. However, we are in a building that is a non-conforming structure. As I read the proposed changes, it seems clear to me that there is a distinction between a non-conforming structure and a non-conforming use, and yet that is not, as far as I can tell, it is not reflected in these proposed changes. So we would just like to first voice our support for these new accommodations, but also ask that the Commission consider expanding those changes to also apply to businesses like ourselves who have an approved use but are in a non-conforming structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian P.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Ian Percy. I work for Highboy Ventures. We're the property owners of the property adjacent to Summum, who you've heard from this evening. Not here to speak against anything in the zoning ordinance. We went through the rezone back in 2020 from our M1 to the RME zone, which allowed a 75-foot building height. And it's our understanding, based on this current consolidation, that that building height is actually going to be reduced in the RME zone when it gets consolidated to 50 feet. We've spent significant resources and time, both in entitlements and design, on our project. And we understand that if this could be adopted, I guess, as soon as a couple months. I know there's a lot that you all have been working through, but we just came here to ask that as you consider adopting or recommending to City Council, that you consider including a grace period for projects that have spent significant resources and time, both in entitlements and design, and consider a grace period that would allow those projects to continue development consistent with the existing ordinance. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item or any new public comment? No. Okay. I'm going to close the public hearing. I real quick want to summarize the public comments that I heard today, and then we'll give the planners a moment to respond to those. First was concerned about zero setbacks, some problems with the notification of this change, concerns about development of very large buildings towards existing smaller scale buildings, landmark, historic, religious buildings that may not have significant setbacks. The issues that Mr. Hemery shared about how a historic or landmark building might be shaded by newly tall buildings. Bird-friendly design, non-conforming structures versus non-conforming uses, and if there's a grace period for some of these properties that may have kind of a down zoning. So, do you want to respond to any of those specific comments or answer any questions about those?
I think, well, I'll jump in on the last one you mentioned, the grace period. That is something that would be up to the city council in their decision, but we have received a few comments about that, and I think staff is generally supportive of some type of, maybe 6-month waiting period till the ordinance goes into effect.
I'll jump in on the RMU. That's being consolidated into the MU8. Building height is dependent on building form. So row houses are limited to 40 feet, whereas other types of development would be to 90 feet in height. And so, yeah, it's 75 and then 90 with design review. Mm-hmm.
So if a property has their entitlements, they still have to conform to the new zoning if they already have entitlements?
If they're entitled, then they can just continue on using the existing zoning. They wouldn't have to comply with the new stuff.
So,
yes.
But the entitlement does expire.
If progress isn't being made, if no updates have been made to a permit, for example, for a year or so,
right?
Then they can expire.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The staff, I feel like, is pretty responsive to questions. So if you have specific questions about your property, please contact them because they are the experts, as always. What can you say about setbacks from historic or landmark buildings?
So we did impose a special setback for landmark buildings. With that, landmark buildings under 50 feet in height, there has to be that scaled 45-degree stepping away of the adjacent new building. We didn't impose any special ground level step back in here. I think that was mentioned as a suggestion, but that is not proposed in here. There generally is a step back next to lower scale zones as well, and then a ground level rear setback next to lower scale zones. So that, yeah, just to address the other comment about setbacks and setbacks next to lower scale properties as well, there's provisions for that to buffer those lower scale properties from new height.
Thank you.
So the gentleman's question about a non-conforming use versus a non-conforming building, is that, I'm not quite sure what that, if there's a distinction here, or if that's something we need to address.
So a non-complying structure might be that it doesn't comply with